Episode 7, The Haunting Remains. Eli left Black Hollow in the early morning after the ritual, his mind swirling with conflicting emotions. He'd freed the town from its curse, severed the shadow's hold, and restored peace, at least, he thought he had. Yet as he drove away, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was leaving behind something unfinished, some fragment of the mystery still lurking in the shadows of the past. The road leading out of Black Hollow was winding and narrow, hemmed in by dense trees and thick fog. As he drove, he glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the dark figure of the shadow lurking behind him. But all he saw were trees and fog, twisting into the distance. Just as the town's outskirts faded behind him, Eli's car sputtered and slowed, finally grinding to a halt. Cursing, he tried the ignition again, but the engine refused to turn over. He stepped out, looking around, but alone on the misty road. A chill ran through him as he realized how eerily quiet the forest was, still and silent as if holding its breath. With no choice but to wait for help, he started to walk back toward Black Hollow, hoping to find someone who could lend him a hand. As he walked, he noticed strange symbols carved into the trees along the path, symbols like the ones he'd seen at the altar and in the Hollow Heart cabin. They hadn't been there on his way out of town, and he felt the familiar, unsettling prickle of being watched. After what felt like an hour, he finally reached the edge of town, surprised to see a crowd gathered in the town square. The townsfolk, who had been so wary of him when he arrived, now looked up in surprise, whispers rippling through the crowd. He caught sight of Evelyn and Lila, both looking grim. "Eli," Evelyn said, her voice tense. "We didn't expect to see you back so soon." "My car broke down on the road," he replied, still glancing over his shoulder as if expecting something to emerge from the fog. "But there's something else. Those symbols, the ones we saw in the woods and at the altar, are carved into the trees along the road." "I don't think the shadow is gone, Evelyn." Lila's face went pale, and the crowd murmured, fear edging back into their voices. "Are you sure?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Eli nodded, glancing around at the gathered townsfolk. "There's something here. Something we didn't account for in the ritual." Evelyn met his gaze, her eyes filled with a resigned understanding. "The shadow may have been weakened, but it was bound to this place for centuries. It wouldn't have left without a fight. There are parts of the curse that even I don't fully understand, parts that were kept hidden to protect the town, or to protect the pact." "What do you mean?" Eli asked, his voice sharpening. "What else do we need to know?" Evelyn took a slow, deep breath. "There are records, ancient accounts kept by the founders, that describe the shadow's origins, its ties to Black Hollow, and how it was bound. The vessel was only part of it. The founders made sacrifices to keep the shadow docile, and they left clues in those records. If we're to finish this once and for all, we need to find them." Eli frowned, his heart pounding. "Where are these records?" Evelyn hesitated, her gaze drifting toward the oldest part of town. "In the Black Hollow Library." The library was a foreboding structure, its stone facade weathered by time and covered in creeping vines. As Eli, Evelyn, and Lila approached, he felt a strange energy emanating from the building, as if it were alive and watching them. The door creaked open, revealing a darkened hallway lined with shelves of books, their spines coated in dust and their pages yellowed with age. Evelyn led them to a locked door at the back of the library, producing a small iron key from her coat. "This room was sealed by the founders," she explained. "Only those who have been touched by the shadow can enter." Eli shot her a questioning glance, but she didn't elaborate. Instead, she unlocked the door and pushed it open, revealing a cramped room filled with ancient scrolls and brittle pages bound in leather. The air was thick with the scent of old paper and decay, and a strange, oppressive silence hung over the room. They spread the scrolls and books out on a large table, sifting through them by the light of a dim, flickering candle. Lila moved quietly among the stacks, her expression serious as she helped them search. At last, Eli came across a tattered journal bound in dark leather, its cover marked with the same symbols that had been carved into the trees. "This is it," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The account of the founders." He opened the journal, scanning the pages, each one filled with detailed descriptions of rituals, sacrifices, and warnings. The founders had tried to bind the shadow to protect the town, but they had known it was only a temporary solution. They had left instructions for a final ritual, a severing that could fully banish the shadow if it ever became too strong. But there was a catch. The ritual requires 3 bloodlines, Eli read aloud, his voice heavy. The descendants of those who first made the pact with the shadow. Evelyn's face turned ashen. 3 bloodlines? That means. She trailed off, and Eli understood immediately. They had to find 2 others from families tied to the original pact, and they would have to perform the ritual with them. I don't know who the other descendants are, Evelyn said, her voice strained. My family has been here for generations, but the other bloodlines, they could be anyone. Eli set his jaw, looking around the room at the shelves of dusty records. Then we find them. The answers are here somewhere. We just have to look. They spent hours in the library, poring over records, wills, and family trees, piecing together the fragments of Black Hollow's history. One by one, the pieces fell into place, revealing a network of families bound by the pact, each one carrying the curse in their bloodline. By dawn, they had identified the remaining 2 bloodlines, the Callaways and the Finches. Eli and Evelyn wasted no time in tracking down the remaining descendants, a process made easier by the small size of Black Hollow. First, they found James Callaway, a reclusive man who lived on the outskirts of town. He was wary at first, but when they explained the situation, his expression turned grim, and he agreed to help. The last descendant, however, was not so easily convinced. Sophie Finch was a skeptic, dismissing Eli's account of the curse and the shadow as nonsense. But as he recounted his experience, describing the hollow heart and the rituals, a flicker of doubt crossed her face. So, you're saying I'm part of some ancient curse? She asked, her tone skeptical. Yes, Eli replied earnestly. I know it sounds unbelievable, but Black Hollow has been plagued by this entity for centuries. It's only with the help of the 3 bloodlines that we can end this curse for good. Sophie stared at him, her expression unreadable. Finally, she nodded, though her reluctance was evident. Fine. But if this turns out to be some elaborate hoax, I swear I'll have you arrested. That night, Eli, Evelyn, Lila, James, and Sophie gathered in the clearing where the altar lay, each of them tense and silent. The air was thick with the anticipation of what lay ahead, and Eli could feel the shadow's presence lurking in the darkness, waiting, watching. Evelyn explained the steps of the ritual, her voice steady, but her hands trembling. We will each place a drop of blood on the altar, and we must speak the words of severance together. It will draw the shadow to us, but if we hold our ground, it will be forced to flee. As they prepared, the shadows around them seemed to grow darker, coiling and writhing as though agitated by their presence. Eli felt a familiar, creeping dread settle over him, the same feeling he'd experienced in the hollow heart. But he steeled himself, determined not to let fear consume him. One by one, they pricked their fingers, letting a drop of blood fall onto the altar. As their blood mingled on the stone, Evelyn began to chant the words of the severance, her voice unwavering. The air grew colder, and the darkness around them thickened, swirling like a living entity. A low, guttural growl filled the clearing, and the ground trembled beneath their feet. You cannot sever me, the shadow hissed, its voice echoing from all directions. This town is mine. Eli felt a surge of anger and defiance rise within him. Not anymore. As they chanted, the shadow's form took shape in the center of the clearing, a massive, hulking figure with hollow eyes and a mouth twisted into a snarling grimace. It lunged toward them, but a brilliant light erupted from the altar, forcing it back. The shadow shrieked, its form flickering and distorting as the ritual's power overwhelmed it. With one final, agonized scream, it dissolved into a cloud of dark mist, scattering into the night. When the light faded, the clearing was silent, and the oppressive weight lifted at last. The shadow was gone, banished for good. Eli looked around at the others, exhaustion etched into their faces. They had done it, they had freed Black Hollow from its curse. And this time, he knew, the peace would be permanent. As dawn broke over Black Hollow, Eli felt a sense of closure settles over him. He had come to this town seeking answers, and he had found them, along with darkness he had never expected. But now, that darkness was gone, and Black Hollow could finally heal. He turned to Evelyn, offering her a faint smile. "It's over." Evelyn nodded, relief shining in her eyes. "Yes. It's finally over." End of episode 7.